Thank you very much. So today I'm going to talk about Western Turkey, Western Anatolia, looking at Palaeoenvironment and animal management from the Neolithic all the way through to the Roman period, using stable isotopes of carbon and nitrogen. So this project is, this study is part of a larger project, the Humidity and Society Project, 8,500 years of climate history in Western Anatolia. We're looking to explore sort of the landscapes of the region and also a perspective on climate change and the impact at micro and macro levels. It's part of the DIA, so the German Archaeological Institute Research Cluster Ground Check. So the three sites that are part of this study, part of this project that I'll be talking about today are Bargenhoek, which is in northwest Anatolia, Kaymakçe, which is sort of more inland West Anatolia, and also Pergamon, which is close to the Aegean coast. And this project overall, we've been using high resolution analysis, stable isotopes, pollen, coring, this kind of stuff, applied to plant and fauna materials from archaeological contexts. And obviously today I'm going to be focusing on the stable isotope analysis from the faunal remains. So these are the locations. So I'm going to show you on a map of the three sites. So this is Bargenhoek, which is up here. This is it's located in the Yenişehir Valley, east of the modern city of Bursa, and south of Lake Iznik. It's been excavated from 2017 to 2015. It's mostly Neolithic, but there are also late Chalcolithic, early Bronze Age, Hellenistic, Roman, and Byzantine levels. Kaymakçe is the second one. It's down here. It's in the Menderes Valley. It's on the shores of Lake Marmara, although it's now dry. But it's kind of like it comes and goes, the lake, basically. It sort of goes through dry periods and stuff. But during the period of occupation in the Middle and Late Bronze Age, there probably would have been a lake there present, very close to the site's kind of settlement and the citadel. Excavation's still continuing. It began in 2014. And it was seems to be most intensively occupied between the 18th and 15th centuries BC, and was likely a regional capital. And Pergamon is probably the most famous of the three sites. It was a regional capital or seat of power during all periods of occupation, particularly from the Hellenistic to Byzantine periods, and it's located just north of the modern city of Bergamo. So, like I said, we're doing stable carbon and stable nitrogen values, a total of 150 animals. So it's been broken down by Bargenhoek of 57, Kaymakçe 48, and Pergamon 45 species. We tried to sample a mix of domestic and also wild species. Most are terrestrial, although as you'll see, we do have some freshwater fish and possibly aquatic bird life, but mostly terrestrial. And the faunal samples come from the context of the stratigraphy that's been dated to Neolithic, late Chalcolithic, early Bronze Age, Middle Bronze Age, late Bronze Age, and the Roman period. So we kind of have a diachronic. We can do like a diachronic evaluation in the region, not at every site, obviously, but kind of regionally one, and also some of the sites we do have some different phases that we can explore diachronically. The results. So the interpretations are still ongoing. This data is quite new. So what I'm presenting today is basically just a preliminary overview. However, from what we've seen so far, there's sort of three main issues or topics that we can kind of focus or discuss. That's what I want to kind of, I'll be focusing on discussing today. One is environmental conditions and anthropogenic factors, so animal management, how people were managing the animals, especially domestic animals. Particularly something interesting has come up, which I'll talk about later, is cattle management. So how people are managing or feeding cattle, and also looking into things like baselines and isoscapes and the importance of them. This has kind of come out from our study as well. So first of all, we'll start from sort of the furthest back in history, Bargenhoek. And this is a carbon nitrogen plot of all the animals by species. And what we see is that there's two kind of main groups we can see by the carbon. So we have this sort of one more, sorry, wrong button. This one sort of more C3 looking, and then this one with a sort of obviously very obvious C4 input into the diet of these animals, particularly the cattle. We sort of see these two different potentially management strategies between cattle, between sort of these more C3 related and more C4. We have, like I mentioned with the barging, there is some different phases. So we have all the way from Neolithic up to the Bronze Age. So this plot shows exactly the same thing, but just different color coded by different phases. So you can see down here, yellow is Neolithic, green is Chalcolithic, and anything red is the early Bronze Age. And again, these two kind of groups as well, we can see. So this next one, still with Bargenhig, this takes the data that we obtained from our study, and we integrated it with a previous study by Bud et al. It was published in 2020. They were focusing mainly on the human diet, but they also sampled some animals. So we integrated the data, the values from that study with our study. Again, so these two groups. And then we can see the humans are up here. So this is the mean of the humans with the standard deviation. And then this is the scatter of these humans, these little dashes. And what we see is that also, well, this is what we're hypothesizing at the moment is probably the sort of natural range, sort of the wild range, if you want to say that, because this is where things like the deer mostly plot in here and stuff, and there's a hare here as well. And then the rest of this kind of mostly domestic animals. And what we can see actually, so again with these two groups talking about, is that through time there's a consistency of animal management strategies. It's not like in the Neolithic they were doing something in particular, and then later they changed in the Chalcolithic or the Bronze Age. But through all time periods, we have these kind of these sort of main groupings. From Bargenhuyk, we also have some delta carbon 13 data for plants, crop seeds. So this is plotting the animals, the fauna remains with the and also the humans here, along with the plants, to see the relation between sort of the very baseline trophic levels with the fauna around. And then also we can see possibly the so this is the C4, the -18 threshold, and again we have this sort of group up here, and then the sort of more C3 looking, and in their relation to what is kind of at least for agriculturally for crop seeds would be the sort of C3 values in the area, in the region. We think that one of the hypotheses is possible that this different group up here may have been herded or come from further away from the site. So in Anatolia, we don't see, there's no cultivation of C4 plants until sort of late Bronze Age and beyond. But C4 grasses do grow in the wild. So this may be an indication of potentially animal management, like pastoralism, herding further away from the settlement. So we move on now to Kaimakja. So this is the Bronze Age site. And again, we kind of have these kind of two groups, one more C3, and then one with a C4 input in the diet, looking more C4. And again, mostly cattle involved in this other more positive carbon value group. Again, this may be to do with herding practices. So again, maybe pastoralism further away from the settlement versus closer to the settlement. Kaimakja, I mentioned Lake Marmara. We do have one catfish here, and then we have these two birds here. Unfortunately, we don't know the species of them, but we do know that they're birds. But judging by their carbon and nitrogen values, it may be suggested that they may be some sort of like an aquatic bird that's feeding on aquatic resources. We put it in relation to this catfish here. It's a Wells catfish. Again, this is sort of what we'd hypothesize to be the natural kind of range again, where mostly the sort of the wild animals, the deer and the hares again. This is where they plot. There's no human data from Kaimakja, but this is just the sort of potentially where they may plot if and when humans are found in samples, judging by the like trophic enrichment. So this is where we hope to maybe find them one day. Again, we also have plants from Kaimakcha in the green box here. Again, mostly it's all crop seeds. So like things like wheat, barley. There's also some bit of vetch, a lot of bit of vetch at this site. And then again, how they relate to the fauna. And again, you see this little group up here. There's this sort of more C4 input into the diet. So Pergamon, the final site to look at and talk about. All the remains from this site come from the Roman period. And again, we have two main groups. This, again, more C3, more C4. And again, it's mostly cattle that are involved in this sort of more C4 group. In the previous two sites I mentioned, because of the time periods, it's likely that, I said one hypothesis that they may have been herded further away, feeding on wild C4 grasses. Obviously, in Pergamon, because of the time period, we have to then consider it might not be necessarily that they came from further away or were herded further away, pastoralism, etc. But they may have been deliberately fed C4 crops, things like sorghum, millet, etc. So this different grouping here with their different carbon values may be a result of intentional feeding, foddering of the animals. Again, this is where the bulk of the wild animals, again, the deer and the hares and stuff. And interesting at Pergamon, we see is in comparison with the other sites, is that there's a bigger overlap between the domestic animals, the domestic actually mostly bulk C3 feeding, and the domestic and the wild animals. Sorry, there's a big overlap, and one potential hypothesis that in this period we may see a greater expansion of anthropogenic influence in anthropogenic landscapes. So there's more combination, there's more sort of clash between sort of a wild and the managed, the sort of managed by humans, because you see this bigger overlap between what we consider like a sort of wild signal and a sort of managed, maybe domesticated signal. So there's also some data from a previous study from Pergamon. It didn't publish the raw results, unfortunately, the raw data, so I haven't been able to integrate it in the same way that I was able to with Bargenhoek. So these are just sort of minimum maximum ellipses for the domestic herbivores, and there's also where the humans are, and they had a couple of dogs as well. We had some more dogs. Interesting, their studies sort of was slightly more positive for carbon than the bulk of the animals we found. I don't necessarily believe that this shows anything in particular, but it's just about sample size. So creating bigger sample size, it's probably like this gives you a truer range of the carbon values at the site. And again, that's that little C4 group of cows over there, and the C3 group, and the nature. So these are the means with the standard deviations for all species from all three sites. So from Bargenhoek, Kaimakcha, and Pergamon. And we can see here, everyone that's that kind of C3 grouping, and there's a C4 grouping, or the greater C4 input into the diet. Again, mostly cows, squares. And this is sort of where the bulk of the wild animals from all three sites plot, with the deer and the hares and stuff are kind of in this kind of area here. So I mentioned cattle, and hopefully I've been able to show that there's some cattle at the sites at least demonstrate they have a different dietary input in terms of carbon. So what we've done is we went through the literature, and all sites in Anatolia that had published stable carbon and nitrogen isotope values for cattle, we collated all those and plotted them, and we see that actually this isn't just something we see in our study area in West Anatolia, but across Anatolia and across time as well. So between all these sites, they have sort of a C3 grouping, and then there's these varying inputs of C4 into cattle diet. And the reason that one of the reasons at least we're leaning towards is thinking of that this is an actual pattern of differing animal management strategies in Anatolia across time, is because the only site that doesn't have any on this side of the sort of C4 line is these light blue squares. And this is because this is from Uluhurk, which is a site on a small island, Gökçeada, in the Aegean Sea. So there's not really anywhere for them to go. They can't do long distance pastoralism into wild highlands because it's a small island. So this kind of lends a little bit of support to the idea that, you know, we've got these two different animal management strategies, particularly for cattle in Anatolia. So to conclude, like I say, it's sort of ongoing, but we're sort of working through things, and there seems to be in Western Anatolia, when we talk about environment, there's the natural sort of delta carbon 13 and delta nitrogen 15 range, at least with terrestrial herbivores in Western Anatolia, is roughly between about minus 22.5 to minus 20 for carbon and 2.5 to 6 per mil for nitrogen, and therefore taking into like trophic enrichment values, the sort of actual natural ice escape value for the region would be minus 23.5 to minus 21 for carbon and 0 to 0.5 to 4 for nitrogen. Obviously, this is only sort of like, at the moment, is a best guess estimation, because as I say, we're still working through interpretation of the data, but also we don't have any carbon or nitrogen values of wild vegetation. We only, like I showed you, we only have values for crops, and obviously there's the potential for those to have been have anthropogenic influences on them, so they may not represent a true sort of natural ice escape value. But what we do see at all three sites, because of the locations and also because of the time periods covered diachronically, is that there seems to be a consistency in environment and climate in Western Anatolia across time. So we don't seem to have any real sort of fluctuations that are visible in the data, at least the data we have. Also, most animals lived in sort of relatively open and temperate environments, and they didn't come from heavily forested. So there's no canopy effect. There doesn't seem to be any coastal or very saline, very wet or very dry environments. There's also consistency in animal management practices across the region through time. Two distinct strategies of animal management for cattle particularly. Pigs are likely to be free roaming. They often sort of go into that kind of natural area of values. And there's some small difference between sheep and goat management, but not as pronounced as for cattle. And then there's obviously, as with all isotope projects, this is part of, there's a lot of people who've helped and contributed. So thank you to all of them, and thank you to all of you for listening, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.